Life is a bold
It is. Sina's going to talk about that. Sina kindly forwarded his bio to me. Sina Bahram, this gentleman right here, is an accessibility consultant, researcher, and entrepreneur. He's finishing his PhD in computer science at NCSU. Obviously, he works on HCI, human-computer interface. In 2012, Sina was recognized as one of President Barack Obama's White House Champions of Change for his work enabling users with disabilities to succeed in science, technology, engineering, and math STEM fields. Please welcome my friend Sina.
All right, testing. Everybody can hear me all right? All right. Well, thank you so much for having me here. I wanted to share some thoughts on accessibility and universal design, some of the things I deal with on a daily basis, and encourage you to be aware of these issues. This is my second ILEAD. I was here in October of last year, and I'm really happy to be back. As Andy said, I have a consulting firm out in North Carolina. We work with museums, learning libraries, technology libraries on systemic accessibility and technology issues. So a couple of ground rules. Let's try to save some of the questions until the end. That actually pains me greatly to say because I love to have interactive talks. But the one thing is I'll be asking you some questions. And so nodding and raising your hand does not work. I think we've covered this with some of you before. So as a result, let's just go yes or I or any other audible indicator you wish to use. Oh, and a few other things in terms of hashtags and such for this talk. We have been using #ILEAD USA. My Twitter handle is @Sina Bahram, and I also tweet a lot with #A11Y, A11Y. Since we have a lot of librarians in the room, does anyone know what a numeronym is? Oh, really? All right. So a numeronym is where you take the first letter of the word and the last letter of the word, and then in the middle you put the number of letters you've chopped off. So A11Y is accessibility, right? I18N is internationalization. L10N is localization. These are three very popular ones. These crop up a lot on servers where you didn't have a lot of space for file names and things like that, but mainly people know it these days in the context of Twitter. So if you want to follow accessibility-related topics on Twitter, #A11Y or A11Y is a pretty good hashtag to follow. I've also got an accessibility list that I can talk to you guys later about that. So what are we going to talk about today? Basically, what is universal design? Go over a couple of examples of it, some real-world examples. Discuss 7 principles of universal design. I find that these are helpful not only in the digital world, but also in the physical world, etc. And then discuss accessibility, which is something that I'm pretty passionate about in terms of persons with disabilities using computer interfaces and all sorts of technology. And then discuss and get you excited about some emerging technologies that are coming out there that I feel have a lot of amazing potential. So, universal design has this, definition of making buildings, products, and services, accessible to folks regardless of age or disability. It stemmed actually from a pretty disability-centric way of looking at things back in the 60s, but then later on, especially in the 80s, it started becoming more about, let's not focus on persons with disabilities, it really applies to the entire population. And so I like that a lot because it's really inclusive of all audiences. It's not specific to somebody with a disability. So a couple of examples. You might not realize this, but curb cuts. Now, this is a very cliche slide, and I'll talk about why it's cliche in a second, mainly because anybody who gives a talk on universal design uses this slide. But it is really important, and the reason it's important is, so curb cuts, great if you're in a wheelchair, right? I mean, it could be fun hopping the curb, but you might not want to for a variety of reasons, like safety. And so, as a result, that's fantastic. You're using crutches, or maybe have a motor impairment, also very great. But honestly, that's not who mainly uses curb cuts. Curb cuts are used the most by parents with strollers and by people with luggage at the airport. Okay, so that's fantastic because now we did this thing. It helps one particular audience. It helps another group of people. This is great. So parents with strollers, check. People with who use wheelchairs or crutches, things like that, check. Now you might think, okay, well if you're blind, that works too, right? You can walk perfectly, so that's excellent. Except for one little thing. If the curb cut is smooth, then you might just accidentally walk into the middle of the street. That could be not good. So because the tactile differentiation between the sidewalk and walking into the street, not so much. So I don't know if you've noticed, but some curb cuts, some of those slopes, they have bumpy things on them. Has anybody noticed that? Okay, so that's colloquially referred to as foot braille. There are no secret messages there, I checked. But I don't understand. I mean, if you're going to have that contract, I would have put secret messages there. But I don't have any friends in civil engineering. So that's a problem, right? So the way they solved that was they didn't just say, oh, well, either we say, well, tough luck, blind people. We augmented it even more as a society, right? And so we put dots on it, we put bumps on it, we made it tactily differentiable. And so now, as a result, it's, again, universally designed, helpful for all people. All right, so a couple of modern-day examples of universal design. Who here uses an electric toothbrush? Say aye. Okay, who here uses a manual toothbrush? Who here does not care about their teeth at all? All right, good, because I don't know if those two eyes matched up to the sum of the room, but you should look into that. So essentially, an electric toothbrush, you might not think of it as a form of universal design, but if you have any kind of tremor or any kind of motor impairment that might make it really hard to move your hand back and forth, that's a really repetitive task. If you have like a broken arm and you can still kind of move your arm, but moving it back and forth might be a little difficult. Something as simple as a vibrating toothbrush, as an electric toothbrush, can be thought of as a form of universal design, and it doesn't prevent someone who perfectly can move their hand back and forth from using it, and that's a really big key, right? Inclusion, not exclusion. You try to open it up to all audiences. Does that make sense? Awesome. So another example would be a talking pill bottle. So I think we all have a lot of experience with, let's say taking medicines, or might have an elderly parent or grandparent that takes a lot of medicines. Sometimes they might forget to take them, or can't see so well as as you get a little older. It's not really you. It's just that the newspaper print is too damn small, right? It's always the newspaper's fault. But no, as a result, why make this tiny little prescription on the bottle? Why not just have a little button there? You push it. The pharmacist has recorded it. Maybe take 30 minutes before meals. Don't mix with alcohol. That sort of thing. And this is fantastic. Not only, let's say, if you're blind or can't see it, but if you're not wearing your glasses in the morning, or you don't have your contacts in, so you're temporarily blind, right? Or, for example, if English isn't your first language, the pharmacist, if you go, like, for example, over to a foreign country, then maybe the pharmacist happens to know English, or they happen to know German if you speak that, and they can record it in that. So it's this idea of just having real-world objects and digital objects as well, which we'll talk about in a bit, be able to adapt to the user, all right? Be able to be a little dynamic. All right, the other thing is light switches. So light switches, I mean, it doesn't get more boring than light switches, but the thing is, these are really important. So you remember the old light switches? We probably have some around here too. It's just the little like rectangle that would come out, and you would flip it up and down, and that would turn off and on the lights, right? Well, the thing is that if you've noticed the newer light switches, have you guys noticed the bars? It's kind of like this flat bar, and you push it in or push it out, right? So that's a lot better of a light switch, and the reason it is for a variety of reasons. Again, you have a motor impairment. It's a lot harder to actuate that little guy. Sometimes those little switches, they're really hard to actuate. Those industrial ones, you really had to put some pressure in it. The other reason is, let's say you're carrying some stuff. You got groceries or whatever. It's really easy to hit with your elbow the flatter light switches. So there are all of these reasons for why something as simple as a light switch you can think of in terms of design. Now, in terms of universal design. Now, there's, remember that whole inclusion versus exclusion. That doesn't exclude anybody from using it by doing that. Something that might is when we do things that are accessibility or disability specific. So I borrowed, with the intent of returning to my hotel room, this thing. All right, so apparently, I did tap in there with a cane and everything, but they might have thought I was deaf, because all disabilities are the same. And so as a result, this is an accessible door knocker, right? So what happens is, oh, by the way, if you might get like, maybe I don't want to give people seizures. So, but it's a flashing light, and and when I bang it, it flashes. Okay, so enough of that. But as a result, this was in my room, and I actually I give talks on this stuff, And it even took me a minute, what is that, right? And I thought it was like this nifty little doorbell, or maybe it had a little cool call button or something. No. And so it would have been trivial to make this accessible. You put a little braille label on here, accessible door knocker or something, or just don't give it to the blind guy. Whatever the case may be, there are forms of doing it correctly. And so that's kind of an example of trying to help, but maybe not getting there the whole way. So be aware of your audience. That's a recurring theme, right? Be aware of who you want to talk to, who you're addressing, who you want to address. All right, so separate but not equal. This is a civil rights language that we're pretty familiar with from 40, 50 years ago. It's an example of some things not to do. So first one, call us and we'll help you. This is very common. Why make our website accessible to someone who can't see? We'll just put a 1-800 number on there and call us and we'll help you out, right? So this is not the appropriate way of doing things. This is an atrocious way of doing things. And the reason is that you're forcing that user or that group of users, of which there are many more than you might think, having to take an extra path or a different path than everyone else. And so you don't want to do that. It's also, just a matter of sometimes what if it's signing up for a medical website or, looking up information that's private. You don't want to incur that level of like an invasion of privacy. So you're always trying to aim for, again, just inclusion, not exclusion. I think that's I'm going to be beating that dead horse. So text-only version. This was something that was pretty popular in the 90s. It should have stayed and died there. Unfortunately, it is not. And so this is an example of, well, we've got this cool flashy website. It's got some 3D little twirly things and so on and so forth. But we're good. We're good. We thought of other audiences. And so folks who are blind, they have this text-only version, right? This is the whole separate but not equal thing, right? That version rarely gets updated. It's not really necessary. If you're interested in that, shameless plug for my talk at 4, and I'll show you how to make websites totally accessible. They can be as 3D and fancy and wonderful as you like visually. And so it's the separate but not equal. If you look at the common day, 2013, 2014 civil rights language, a lot of folks refer to this as the accessibility ghetto. It's not actually an urban reference, but rather a World War II reference, the idea of segregating people in a group. So it's something you just really don't want to do. It's a bad idea. Don't do it. Specialized interfaces. So this is things like, for example, at a museum, you might have an exhibit, and then you might have something off to the side. So if you're blind, go use this over here, right? Again, separate but not equal. That should be pretty self-explanatory. All right, so the 7 principles of universal design. So there is a Center for Universal Design at NC State, my university, so shout out to the Wolfpack. And this is their plug. And so we're going to go over these 7 principles and how we can link it to digital world, the real world, physical world, and so on and so forth. All right, so equitable use. So this is the idea that if, regardless of functional limitation, regardless of functional ability, can you still use this thing, right? So the image on the screen here is actually an exhibit I was working on with one of my clients, the Museum of Science up in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Awesome museum, by the way. If you guys have not been there, a lot of fun, really good people. And they were really interested in having an inclusive experience. So the idea here is, again, not the exhibit off to the side. Why can't we just make the regular exhibit accessible? This takes the data from wind turbines that are up on the roof. It takes that data in real time, or maybe like on a 5-minute delay, something like that. And there are all sorts of different wind turbines. So the visitors, as they come to the museum, they can see the graphs of how the different turbines work. Some turbines are more efficient at 5 miles per hour wind. Some are more efficient at 10. Some have different shapes. How can you compare and contrast these? We use graphs a lot, and spatial information is oftentimes, visually displayed. So how do you make that accessible to someone who can't see? And so the way we did it is we allow the user to touch the screen. Anywhere you touch, it reads the value. We even sonify the graph. So if you're not familiar with sonification, everybody know what a parabola is from math? A U-shaped, y equals x squared, right? I promise, no more equations. But if you wanted to sonify that, and I have to do this backwards, so I'm doing it in a mirror, but if you wanted to sonify that for someone who's blind, you could go, right? And you would also pan too, so, and as a result, unfortunately the mic is mono, but that's all right. But when you do that, you can map the visual information to the audio domain, or to your ears, to the audio world. And so that's the sort of stuff we did. This way, when a 5th grader comes in, maybe she has a visual disability, whatever the case may be, she talks about the exact same thing on the school bus ride home than all her other friends do. So she doesn't feel excluded, right? And that's a really big takeaway. It's not just about the tech. It's not about the sexy, cool things we can do with programming. It's actually about people, and that really matters. All right, so flexibility in use, right? So this is the idea that people use things different ways, right? So we need to make things flexible. This is not just technology. You're thinking, well, how does this apply, you know, in like the real world? There's lots of devices that, you know, you can use in very different ways. And so as a result, it's just really important to kind of think about that and think about that people perceive information in different ways. This exhibit was something that I helped design at a hackathon. It was this conference. It was called Creating Museum Multimedia for Everyone. I've got a blog post on it if you're interested in it. One of the most fun things I've been a part of. And we just grabbed some data, some information about an exhibit that was going to go up at the Museum of Science, and we tried to make it accessible. So we put this little stick thing together. We made the graph tactile. We did all this in a couple of days. There was a shop in the basement of the museum, and it was fantastic to just say, look, can we just brainstorm some ideas and very quickly put together an interface to show that this doesn't take $1 million. This isn't. I mean, we used, you know, a couple of bucks of like some plywood and some hot glue. I wrote some code. You know, it's just not that difficult if you're committed to thinking about doing things this way. To just think about how people use it differently. All right. So number 3, simple and intuitive use. This is the idea that you don't need to, you know, you shouldn't have to read the manual to figure it out, right? I think that just stems from the fact that I never read the manual, but it really, I'm a really big fan of this. Things need to be intuitive. All right, so this is maybe a somewhat straightforward example, but we've got a bathroom sign, right? You've got a pictogram of a male, pictogram of a female. It says women, it says mujeres in Spanish. It says women in Braille, right? So a lot of different modalities of information there. You're expressing the information in a lot of different ways. So somebody who doesn't know the language might still be able to figure out from the picture. Somebody who can't see can feel it, et cetera, et cetera. Does that make sense? All right. In some, the question was, is the woman's silhouette raised at all? That's brought to you by Andy, of course. And as a result, it is. It sometimes is. Although you have to be a little bit careful because, you know, if you're just going to raise a visual diagram, it's not always the best idea. Sometimes there's guidelines for how to make tactile diagrams better. So perceptible information, right? This is the idea that you don't want to assume that things are going to remain static. Sometimes there's crowd noise. Sometimes you've got little children running around and screaming. Sometimes there's a plane flying up overhead. What are some of the things you can do? So there's some examples here like volume control. All right, it's that simple. If you're going to have a display or anything that involves audio, just use some volume control. It's as simple as that. If you're going to have audio in your presentation or in a video, subtitle it. Just caption it. Captioning is so important these days. It's not only for people who are deaf or hard of hearing. It helps you get search engine results on, you know, SEO, search engine optimization online. It lets your users search your content. We've heard about MOOCs here and how, you know, those courses benefit so much from captioning because if that content is captioned, it can then be fed into a translator for different languages. It's just a good idea. Don't leave your content locked into one single binary format, all right? Information wants to be free, so there you go. And then for adjustment, you know, there's a tiltable screen. So let's say someone's in a wheelchair or someone is just perhaps, you know, you've got a little person. You want to be able to allow them to easily consume the content, and not have to, like, you know, jump up on the table or something like that. And so it just makes good sense. All right. So tolerance for error. This is the idea that sometimes we make things really complicated and they hold a lot of state, right? They remember what the user did last. And then you get this complicated thing where you walk away from it and then, it's just, you know, somebody else comes up and they're confused as to what to do. An example of something that doesn't do this is a Coke machine, right? Probably should have rebranded this given the university's license with Pepsi, but oh well. So, and so this is the idea that, you know, it's pretty hard. Now, I actually have to be very careful when I show this slide at a technology conference because inevitably there's the 20 hands that tell me how to hack a Coke machine, which, yeah, I get it. But for most people, it's very hard to screw up a Coke machine. And so it's a lot of tolerance for error. If you put the change in wrong, it spits it out. Push the, you know, you push a button without putting money in, it behaves, it just doesn't give you anything, so on and so forth. So this is the idea of tolerance for error. Does that make sense? All right. So, all right. Low physical effort. This should be pretty self-explanatory. Again, you don't want to force people to have to exert a lot of pressure to do something, just physical effort to do something. Doorknobs. So we've talked about light switches. How about doorknobs? So doorknobs are sort of like the worst thing ever, right? Like they're these round things. They don't really afford, their affordance isn't very clear. Like, do you turn it? Do you sometimes push it? It's round, so you might want to turn it. Yeah, and so on the other hand, a push bar on a set of double doors is pretty fantastic. It's very clear that you push it in. You can push it in with not your hand, so you can push it in with your elbow or your hip if you're carrying groceries, whatever the case may be. It's basically, it's hinged oftentimes, or at least hopefully well, so that it doesn't take a lot of effort to push those double doors open. And so they're just a really great kind of alternative to a door with a doorknob, right? All right. So size and space for approach. This is the idea of if you have somebody who uses a wheelchair, or you might have someone who has a personal assistant with them, whatever the case may be, tight spaces are tough. And this, I'm sure, comes up in, for example, libraries, where space is at a premium, and good luck asking for more. And so there are, though, creative ways that you could do this. For example, if the thing that you need your users to, or your patrons to have access to, you're not able to make a lot of space around it, maybe you can make it movable so that it can be moved out. Maybe it's not going to always be appropriate for it to move out, but you've just kind of thought, well, what if somebody comes in here and needs a little bit more space? What are the things I can do? So the idea here is, behind all of these really, is you're very rarely going to ever get 100% coverage on everything. It's a great goal, and you should strive for it. And we all should, like, every day. But the idea is to think about these and just incorporate it into what we're doing. All right, so I want to transition a little bit from universal design to accessibility. These terms are oftentimes linked to one another. Accessibility is a very overloaded word. But it's basically the ability of all people to use a product, service, a place, a thing, regardless of functional limitation, right? And this is, sometimes you can think of accessibility as reachability, right? Is the user able to reach everything they need to do? Not only in the physical world, like touch it, but in an interface. Are they able to, for example, if they only use a keyboard, tab to everything, or use the arrow keys to get everything? So kind of coverage or reachability. Whereas oftentimes usability is another term that comes up in the context of accessibility, and that's more, what's their experience? Is it going to take them 30 minutes to do something that another user can do in one? And if so, what can we do about that? So there's that subtle distinction between accessibility and usability. All right. So burden or boon. Is accessibility a burden or a boon? There's two ways of looking at this, right? So this image basically, like unlocking the chain, you have kind of two options. You can either view this as a good thing, or you can view it as a bad thing. It really is that simple, right? You can view this as a legal compliance issue and talk about regulatory burden and a lot of other boring things, or you can just think to yourselves, you know what? This is just a really good idea. There's actually a lot of opportunities. There's a lot of growth potential here. We're reaching more people. And so why don't we do it? All right. So this is my one slide. This is the one legal slide, right? So I have to do it so Accessibility HQ can sign off. All right. So basically, it's the law. You should do it. It's the right thing. And there are things, if you're interested, 508, the American with Disabilities Act, or ADA. There's also 504. And I'll be happy to talk with you about that offline. But given my personality and sort of the wonderful, amazing people I get to deal with on a daily basis, I rarely use this. I don't talk about the law. I don't talk about legal requirements. I talk about people. Sometimes with businesses, I talk about things like return on investment, which we'll get to in a second. And those are the better ways and better reasons of doing this stuff. Not because you're worried about getting sued. There is one thing of note. The UN has the Convention for Civil Rights, Persons with Disabilities, which I believe, given recent administrative changes here in the U.S., we did finally pass. So we are now a signatory on that convention. The other thing I'll mention, just to call out to you guys, librarians are the good guys. Okay, so I really should not need to talk about legal stuff with you guys. You guys are the good guys. You are like, you dwell in temples of knowledge, and so this is very simple. Let's do it for everybody. So that's why I have it on here. I've said it. Let's move on. All right. So Tim Cook, this is the CEO of Apple, took over for Steve Jobs, and he was at a board meeting. And a gentleman from, I believe it was New York, was this conservative group that is one of Apple's investors, one of their institutional investor, so they buy millions of shares at a time, that sort of thing, was complaining a great deal because of Apple's investment in green energy. He was like, well, why are you making data centers that don't poison the planet? You should just, care about profit, da-da-da-da-da, right? Very standard business argument. And Tim Cook was saying, well, we want to leave the world a better place, and so on and so forth. And the guy kept pushing. And so then, this is, I think, the only time anyone ever knows this particular gentleman to lose his cool in public, turns to the guy and says, when we work on making our devices accessible for the blind, I don't care about I don't consider the bloody ROI, the return on investment, which made me promptly have to take back half the bad things I ever said about Apple. So that's okay. I'm glad to do it. That's one of the classiest statements of a CEO on accessibility that I've ever heard. It was amazing, actually. And in the same breath, he basically told the guy, if you don't agree with that, maybe you should consider dropping the stock. And so that was pretty amazing. But this is the business side. This is another reason to do it. It's the right thing to do, and it really can be viewed as a boon, not a burden, right? All right. So here we go. This is advantages, not obstacles. There's a prop for this, I believe. There we go. We have the lobster. So, all right. Does this guy have a name, by the way? No? Lobster. Okay, that's excellent. And so, all right. So this is kind of moving on to the idea that there are technologies out there. There's some fantastic interfaces out there that are, at first they seem pretty visual. First they seem really advanced, or, oh man, I mean, if I'm trying to be all accessible and universal design, I'm trying to include everybody, what do I shouldn't use those things, right? And I'm here to kind of try to convince you, if I possibly can, that that's not the right way to do it. You really should try to adopt new technologies. So the idea behind the lobster is, lobster, I have it on somewhat good authority, it used to be served to prisoners, right? This was actually a prisoner food. And then, as we do as fickle humans, we decided that it was exclusive and wonderful. And so the other picture is of the $1,000 lobster frittata in a hotel in New York. And so kind of showing that you could either view it as a really horrible thing and you give it to prisoners, or you view it as a wonderful thing and you spend $1,000 on a frittata. So that's sort of the idea there. All right, so 1 second, technical difficulties. Wouldn't be a proper talk without them. All right, there we go. Do you guys see that? Yep. There we go. Back and right. All right. So, all right. So 3D printing. Who here is familiar with 3D printing? Awesome. Very inclusive, by the way. We are, not I am. That's wonderful. So this is the idea that you can create objects. It's a machine that can extrude plastic. It heats it up, both PLA and ABS plastic, to around 240, 270 degrees centigrade, which is pretty hot. Don't touch the tip. No, really, don't touch the tip. And as a result, it the plastic kind of melts immediately as it's layered, and you can make real-world objects. So you can print things. And this, to me, is one of the coolest things I get to deal with, honestly. I personally view this as transformative as the internet. In fact, possibly more so, because it really changes the paradigm of what we think about when we talk about acquiring or getting stuff. Now we can make that stuff. And when you combine it with thoughts like open source and free software and things like that, all of a sudden someone with a one-time investment and very little materials cost in a third world nation or somewhere else can make their own stuff. Part on your dishwasher breaks, print another one. Was going to a 3D conference. It was a 3D unconference, actually. This is back in North Carolina. And one of my colleagues was bringing their 3D printer to the conference. We all were. We were bringing different examples of things. And he's loading into the back of the pickup truck. It's North Carolina. Everybody has a pickup truck. And he loads it in, and he smashes the back. Just like it bows in. It just snaps right off. And so, oh, man, that's horrible. So comes to the conference, and he puts it down. And as he's giving his little intro, we all going around the room giving our 5-10 minute spiel. In his spiel, he told us the story. And then he said, and the MakerBot is sitting in the corner over there printing its own replacement. It'll be done in about an hour and a half. And so it was printing its own replacement. And, by the way, because I'm thinking I might be clumsy again, I made it stronger. I went into the file, I edited it, I made that piece stronger so that next time maybe it won't break so easy. So that to me is really cool. Okay, that's just really, really cool. Obviously, this has accessibility implications as well. It facilitates access to real-world objects. So before, let's say you were blind, you were taking a math class, something like that, and people are talking about something really complicated, like a 3D knot, right? This actually happened to me. I was in the lab with a buddy. He was trying to explain this 3D shape to me. And he's talking to me about a toroid that has no beginning, it has no end, da-da-da-da-da. And we're just, I'm like, I'm not getting this. And so then I said, wait, we have a printer right there on my desk. Why don't you just print it? So he did. So he just drops this in the palm of my hand, right? And I didn't need the verbal description or anything. I could see what he said when he said it has no beginning, no end. I can follow it with my fingers. It's perfectly tactile. It's totally great for kids because it's really nice and hard. You can throw this around a concrete lab, not that I've ever done that before. And it's great. And so this to me is amazing, that we can, using software and one piece of hardware, we can instantiate in the real world something that previously he was having struggle, he was struggling to describe to me. And I just thought that was so cool. The other thing related to 3D printing is you can really explain sometimes concepts that are maybe not totally visual, even if you can see, unless if you're looking at a microscope or an illustration. And so this is a model of DNA, right? And I spent a little bit of time concentrating on not being the stereotypical blind guy working on accessibility, right? So I refused to do that. And so I did everything, you name it, I did it. And one of the things that I thought I was really interested in was bioinformatics. And biology, basically, biology plus computers. And so I had done research in this space. Okay, I can tell you about transcription and translation of RNA, but I'd never touched this before. And that was really cool to me, that like now, some third grader, it doesn't matter if they're blind, or maybe they can't just see too great, or maybe have an intellectual disability, they have these multimodal ways of just exploring these objects. This breaks, so what? It's a couple of bucks. It's not even, this is probably 25 cents of material. Doesn't matter. So that's just really transformative as far as I'm concerned. The one other thing I'll show you really quick is, this is a 3D doodler. Is anybody familiar with this? All right, so this is a 3D printing pen. So instead of the 3D printer that is this big, about this high, that wide, weighs a good 30 pounds or something on my desk, this is a 3D printer. You load the plastic in. At the back here, I have some with me, by the way, so if you guys want to look me up later and you want to make stuff, I should give this to Beck. Okay, all right, so... please feel free. And it has little extruder buttons right here, and you can make objects. And so what's interesting here is I was really fascinated by this because to me I was viewing it as an amazing opportunity for collaboration between someone who can see and someone who can't. Because someone who can see can draw something, say, okay, how about this? And then the person who can't can take this from them and add a little something. So you can actually collaborate even on something really visual like doodling, but do it in a way that has elements of accessibility and universal design, that it's tactile. So I'm really excited about stuff like the 3D doodler. But please see me if you want to play with that. All right, so touch interfaces. This is the idea that basically, well, there's no buttons, so how are you going to use it if you can't see, right? And for a little period of time, this actually used to be true. But it turns out that it doesn't have to be. And the reason is that there are software-based approaches. Actually, I work on some of this for my dissertation, for taking a touchscreen interface and for making that accessible. All right? So I've got, for example, a regular iPhone here. So here we go. Let me just turn some speech on. And I can show you guys a more in-depth demo of this, but I'll just hold it up to my lavalier mic for a second.
Messages.
And so it's doing that, right? It's talking. I can swipe. And for those of you who are here, also I see all the tweets coming in. Thanks for that. And I can use gestures to navigate around, right? And there's that. And actually, if somebody does want to fire off a tweet, it should actually come in and we can have it read it so we can see that it's automatic. So here we go. No pressure.
Yeah.
All right. Just mention me. All right.
Mentioned by ch. Absent of error, let me play with that pen.
There you go. And Pen wants to play with the pen. It's talking a little bit fast, but that's what it said. All right, so there's that. I'll shut her up so she doesn't interrupt. So these kind of interfaces exist. Again, the thing with the Museum of Science, making that kind of visual interface exist. So let's not limit ourselves by oh, it's touch, it's totally not accessible to somebody who can't see, that's nonsense. It's completely able to be made accessible, so let's concentrate on ways of doing it. All right, I've got another prop, so to speak, for this next piece. So let me go ahead and grab that and do this. All right, so I thought that the only glasses blind people wear are sunglasses, right? All right. So yeah, right, these aren't my Ray Charles shades, though. So this is the idea that there's augmented reality. I feel really stereotypical with these on. And I'm going to take those off. And so this is the idea of augmented reality. Have people heard of Google Glass? Okay, so Google Glass is a very simple mechanism. There's a little prism off to the side. It fires light into your eye. Just a very simple projection system, and it looks like a screen in your peripheral vision. And so when you wear it, you can still see the regular world because it doesn't cover up your central vision. But off into your periphery, you can check your email or look at a photo that you just took or look at a map while you're going somewhere. So it's very much the concept of kind of ubiquitous computing. It's always with you, and augmented reality in that you can take reality, you can take our visual perception of the real world and layer some information on top of it. With Google Glass, it's off to the side. There are some other companies. Oculus Rift is one of those products. They actually just yesterday got acquired by Facebook for $2 billion. And they are a heads-up display. So it covers your vision completely. And as a result, it's immersive, right? And these have some massive opportunities. Well, first of all, for education and for exploring environments that you can't physically afford to go to, and for giving detailed information about the real world, such as, for example, looking at something and then overlaying information on top of it. A lot of cool sci-fi related possibilities. But one of the other things that they can facilitate, if you think about it, is accessibility. So these devices, because they're so vision-based, have to see and have to know about all the things that, because of a physical reason, I don't, right? So gaze tracking, just because I'm looking over there, sorry for popping the mic, I apologize. And so just because I'm looking over there, it knows that I'm looking over there, so it can tell me something about it, right? I could look over there and it could say Andy. So all of a sudden, things like networking become a lot less awkward for somebody with a visual disability who's, let's say, in an office party or something like that, or you want to know that your boss is around, right? These little things that might not come up, might not occur to you, but they're really, really important. And technology can, make the physical world a better place, not just the digital world. And that's something I'm really, really quite passionate about. All right. So, all right, one sec. Same deal. All right. So, okay. So 3D and natural user interfaces. Are folks here familiar with things like Microsoft Kinect for the Xbox? Okay. If you have teenage boys, you are. So essentially, the idea here is that why are we limiting ourselves to keyboards and mice and maybe a touch screen? Why can't we use our bodies, our environment as input into technology, right? And so this is this is really prevalent in gaming right now. I love it for things like data exploration. So this is the idea that if you think about it, when I'm using a screen reader, you'll see a little bit more of this at 4 o'clock if you come to the web accessibility thing. But when I'm using a screen reader, it's a very linear interface, right? Because I can't skim, right? Because I'm not seeing that interface. So I'm limited to the keyboard. I can tab around. I can jump around a little bit. But that idea of that 2D perception, that's not there. That was what's so great about touch. When you make a touch screen accessible, one of the wonderful things is all of a sudden if somebody says, oh, it's the button in the upper right-hand corner, that makes sense to someone who's blind just as much as it does to someone who can see, because they can move their finger to the upper right-hand corner and it reads that to them. So similarly here, this knows where you're pointing or where you're moving or how you're moving your arm. And because of proprioception, the idea that we know where our limbs are, you can make these nonlinear interfaces to data exploration. All of a sudden, you don't have to force someone who's blind, for example, to arrow through all of those rows of a spreadsheet. They can quickly make a gesture or quickly move their hand and pan through that information. So allowing these kinds of static things to come to life is what makes me excited about stuff like natural user interfaces. The Connect is one example. Another one is the Leap Motion. So have folks seen the Minority Report movie? Okay, so remember that that interface Tom Cruise was using in there? Okay, so that's, there's a company called Leap Motion. And what they do is they basically said, well, we could build that. And so they did. And I actually don't have it up here, but that's all right. Basically, it is the size of a rectangle. And I have that. So I have that interface if you want to come see it. Now, it's not, as good as the one in movies, but essentially it can see your hands. It does hand recognition in the air. You can move around for, with it, and it lets programmers make apps for things like that. And so, again, this has some fantastic possibilities for data exploration in an eyes-free way. It has some fantastic possibilities for getting kids interested in being more hands-on with what they're interacting with. But it also has some limitations, which is something we should think about in the context of technology. Tom Cruise said he felt like his arms were about to fall off after the 20th taping, right? Because, you get this idea of gorilla arm. So there are limitations here to be aware of. But as I'm talking about all of these technologies, one of the takeaways I hope you take from it is play with it. Don't be afraid to just play with it. Sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not, and sometimes it can open up some opportunities that you totally might think might exist just because it's visual at first glance. So personal philosophy towards technology. Basically, my idea is that the more input we can gather from users, from the environment, the better interfaces we can make, right? We can make them rich, interactive, efficient, and all of those great things if we just gather more and more input. Computers were very static for a long time. There was this box, and you would just use that. There was a keyboard, okay, great, now we got the mouse, and okay, touch screen's great. But the more input we can gather, the more semantics and the more context clues we can gather from the environment, I personally believe the better we can make technology. And again, it's not just to make technology better, it's the better we can make people's lives, because if they're using technology as a tool, not just for entertainment or gaming or whatnot, then the more we can facilitate technology actually helping people. As for call to action, this is just some personal things that I hope you will do. So when you're designing, when you're laying out an exhibit, when you're putting a display up, if you're just even writing content, it can be anything at all. Think of all audiences, not just the ones you wish you had, not just the ones that you might expect. Try to think of all audiences when you're giving a presentation or anything to see how would that work for them, and what could I do, what little things could I do to make it better? Because it actually turns out that if you do that, you help a lot more than you might think. In college, I would ask my math professors and science professors especially to, instead of saying, we move this over there, right, they would have to say it, right? So we move, I promise no more equations, but we move x plus 3 under y minus 2, that sort of thing. So I could know what they were doing. And every single time I had a professor do that, I would hear students go up to him after class, or her after class, and actually up to me as well, and say, because they did that, I was actually able to follow along better. Because it let me look down on my sheet of notes, and I was taking some notes as I was hearing the information. It reinforced it because maybe I was in the back of the room. Just really simple stuff. But this idea that don't just stick to one modality. It's boring. So, there you go. As far as accessibility challenges go, it's really easy to view this stuff as hard or tough, or I don't have time for it. But there's some really cool opportunities there. And so I would encourage you to just, this is personally a life policy for me, but instead of viewing something as a challenge, view it as an opportunity and as a chance to innovate and to do something really cool there. I think you'll be rewarded for doing that. And as far as new technologies goes, embrace it. All right, don't be afraid to fail forward. I really just think that this has been pretty much a reiterative theme in every single talk we've had, which is just don't be afraid to fail. It's really not that bad. You learn something, and if you're not failing, you're not learning, and so you're not doing things in a more awesome way the next time. So I would encourage you to fail forward. As far as contact information, I really encourage you to please contact me if you have any questions. I would love to talk with you here or anywhere else. I'm easily reachable online. My email address is here, website, blog, all of that good stuff, social media. And I would say that if you have questions about accessibility or universal design, or maybe have some things that you were wondering but were embarrassed or shy to ask, I don't care. Pretty open about it. And I really welcome you to do that. And with that, thank you so much for having me. I think we have some time for some questions.
Yes, we do. We have Gwenny, I think we have about 5 minutes.
No, we actually have more than that. Our next session doesn't begin until 2:05.
Okay, so there's 20 minutes between now and 2:05.
I heard those comments this morning. I'm not getting in the way of bathroom breaks, so it's a lot harder for me to run away from them. So I'm not too. But having said that, so we won't bother with raising hands. But if maybe you want to jump out, or none at all.
What would be an easy way to make a current website accessible? For example, you already have tons of images, tons of content.
So this is like the remediation problem. So I'll talk to you a little bit more about this at 4. But basically the idea there is you want to think about that a little bit differently than, a lot of the stuff I talked about now, you have the luxury of starting at the beginning, right? I was speaking of universal design and all of those things when you're first making it. But oftentimes in the real world, you have things that you have to make accessible after the fact. And when that's the case, there are some strategies for doing it. The most important is that as you're doing it, make sure you're following standards and guidelines. Those exist. And the other thing is to involve your prospective audience. So do actual user testing. If you're wanting it to be accessible for people with disabilities, then involve people with disabilities. If you're wanting to target an elderly audience, then actually involve them. If you can't involve them in the design because the stuff's already made, at least involve them in the testing as you're remediating it. But as far as a more technical answer, I can get back to you on 4 on the web accessibility front of that. But does that help a little?
Yes.
Yep.
I have a question. Is there a way to help a visually impaired person with those Google glasses navigate down the street? Or is there another way to do that?
So the question was, is there a way to help someone who's visually impaired with Google Glass navigate down the street? The answer is yes. So there are several ways of doing that. Some of them involve something called computer vision, or teaching computers how to see. The major difficulty sometimes is things like processing power and things like that, and also reliance, right? So if you have good, let's say, mobility skills, you know how to use a cane, you know how to pay attention to traffic patterns, if you want to introduce a technical device into that, you don't want to tell the person only rely on this, right? Because there's a safety issue there, unless if it's 100% awesome. And it's not there yet. But there are apps that already are starting to look at talking GPS, talking navigation, obstacle detection, points of interest identification, Starbucks, 20 yards to your right, that sort of thing. And so by combining a lot of those things with something as simple as walking with a cane, for example, you can really enhance or augment, which is the whole point, augmented reality, that experience for someone who can't see. And the other importance, of course, is that you're freeing them up to do that with audio because they might be wearing that and therefore they can hear it in their ears because their hands are busy, for example, using a cane.
Hey, Sina, what's the role of Braille in your world, and where do you see the future of Braille?
So I'll parse that 2 different ways. Me personally, and then maybe I'll be really arrogant and talk for all blind people. So if you're asking me personally, I find it really helpful in terms of science and mathematics, so basically STEM fields. I think that where you have a lot of spatial information, it's really, really crucial. I think that it's often crucial in times where you don't want to whip out another interface or a technical interface to do something. For example, we could come up with this awesome way of all bathroom signs are totally amazing because, they've got this great, like, let's say UPC code or QR code on it, and anybody can use a phone to scan it, or you could just put a Braille label on it. And I don't really want to just take out my phone and be like, is this the women's room? When also that's kind of creepy. Instead of just quickly touching, okay, men versus women, right? So there's immediacy, there's those kinds of situations. I find that with long portions of, what am I trying to say? Long pages of text or anything like that, I prefer speech. And the reason I do is because my computer reads at around 950 words a minute. So that's a lot of information very quickly. And with Braille, that's going to be a little bit slower. The only other thing I'll say about Braille is that I do think it's really important, especially to teach younger folks Braille, because it is a script. So a lot of folks call Braille a language, which is incorrect, right? It's not a language, it's a script, because there's English Braille and Latin, Spanish Braille. There's no language there, it's just a script. And as a result, it teaches you about the language that you're speaking, or that you're writing in and that you're reading. So things like spelling and vocabulary and grammar, those sorts of things. That doesn't always come across when you're only using audio. So I think it's very important, especially for young people, to learn Braille. Yeah, sure. Anything else? All right. Well, thanks, guys. I really appreciate it.
Laptops, you think they'll be better for